Hello, welcome to another episode of the MBUK podcast. I'm Tom Marvin, joined as ever by Rob Weaver. How are you getting on, Rob?
I'm good, thanks, Tom. How are you?
I'm all right, thank you. Yeah.
Good.
Today, we have actual mountain bike royalty. It's our first ever mountain bike Hall of Fame entrance.
Yeah.
Yeah. Steve Behr, how are you getting on, Steve?
Good, thanks, Tom.
Excellent. So, Steve, for those who don't know, you are a mountain bike photographer and you have been photographing the world's best riders for MBUK and others, I'm sure.
Mostly for MBUK.
Mostly for MBUK. Since, we reckon, issue 1 or 2, so 30 odd years ago.
35 years ago, is it?
Do the maths. 88.
37 years
37
ago.
years ago, yeah.
Quite a long time, a lifetime.
A lifetime for some of you, yeah.
For some of the people sat in this room.
More than.
Maybe not some of us.
I guess we start off, obviously, we start at the beginning perhaps, but your first career wasn't photography. So before that you were a solicitor, is that right? How did you end up in the photography game?
Well, I'd always sort of been into photography, but never actually owned a decent camera. And when I started getting paid as a lawyer, even though it wasn't, I was an apprentice lawyer, if you will. First paycheck, I thought, this is good. I'll go and buy a camera, a decent camera. Bought myself a Pentax ME Super, which was great back then. Started, reading magazines, taking pictures, enjoying myself. And then as time went on, I got a bit better at it, more interested in it. And then mountain biking came along, bought a mountain bike, and the two kind of coincided and grew alongside each other.
Mm-hmm. So you're sort of photographing sort of your hobby with your hobby?
Yeah, exactly.
Were you sort of riding with people who were of a high standard particularly? How did you get into sort of the more pro sort of photography?
No, I wasn't. I mean, I remember seeing a mountain bike in Hyde Park of all places in the
Mecca.
early
known
to mid '80s or something. Oh, that looks really interesting. I mean, I just had a random bike that I used to ride around London, and that looks really cool. And you see a few more, and then I went on a weekend with Jeremy Tor. I don't know if you remember Jeremy Tor. He and Max Glaskin ran the mountain bike club, and they put on events, races. They ran the national series as it was. I think it was called the national series, but they ran the mountain bike events then. And I went on a weekend that he organised. He was doing weekends frame building and learned to ride a mountain bike. He was based in Telford, and we went up there with a bunch of friends, and we rode around for the weekend. I thought, this is brilliant,
Mm-hmm.
Went out and bought one pretty soon after that, and I think I'd taken a few pictures on that weekend, and then Jeremy called me and said, could I supply a picture for some publication? Oh, this is great, Going to get paid for a photograph. So it sort of snowballed from there, and then I started going to more events.
Mm-hmm.
And then I saw an ad. I was also into windsurfing at the time. And I saw an ad in Tim and Chris, who started MBUK, had a windsurfing magazine back then. They used to run a little supplement at the back for a few pages of mountain biking stuff, because the wind didn't often blow hard enough. And the guys all used to go off riding mountain bikes. And I saw a little ad in the back there, we're starting a mountain bike mag and send in your pictures. So I'd been to the odd race through Jeremy, their mountain bike club stuff. And sent in some pictures, and I think went into issue 1 or 2, I can't remember.
Proper back in the day stuff.
So
you were still being a solicitor or whatever it was and photographing on the side as a hobby, but started to getting paid for that?
Yes. I wasn't getting paid a lot, and I wasn't doing that very often, but I sent in those pictures to MBUK, and then I got a phone call from Chris saying, could I go to Turkey next week to shoot a feature for the magazine? I was like, not really. I'm still, working as a solicitor. He said, can you do a feature on couriers in London then? Okay. So that was my first feature for MBUK.
Huh. And how long did it take before you could sort of quit being a solicitor? Did you manage to do that within a year or two, or was it a bit of a slow burn?
No, so what actually happened was that I'd never really intended to carry on being a solicitor. It was something I was trying to do until I found something that I really wanted to do. I didn't make the jump straight from one to the other, but I quit to go traveling around the world. And that was just after I'd started doing a bit of photography. I thought, I'll travel around, I'll see if Tim wanted a feature on me traveling across the States. And the MBUK Magazine back then wanted a feature on me riding in New Zealand, or not me riding, but people riding in New Zealand. So I had two things to get on with on this round the world trip, and went to went to the East Coast, stayed with a friend, bought a van, bought 2 bikes. My then girlfriend, now wife Jill, came and joined me, and we drove across to California, taking pictures and riding in various places on the way across, and it was fun. And that feature also ended up that was probably my second feature in MBUK. So there was that long period where I knew I'd quit being a solicitor, but didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't really think I would go around the world and then come back and be a photographer. But when I came back, I met up with a guy who was a ski photographer, very good ski photographer, Tony McLaughlin, and we set up a picture library together. And my idea was, I'd always liked the idea of stock photography, go and take pictures of things you like, take pictures of, and then sell them to people for vast sums of money. Obviously, that doesn't really work, but it's kind of a good idea. Good idea back in the day. Yeah, exactly. And so he and I set up this picture library, and then I started getting more and more work from Tim because I wasn't really doing anything else. I'd come back with the idea of doing something, but I didn't know what. I had all sorts of weird ideas that never really came to fruition. But in the meantime, Tim kept calling me because I wasn't busy. I had a camera. I was, happy to take pictures of bicycles, obviously. And before I knew it, I was a mountain bike photographer.
Okay. No, haven't looked back.
I haven't looked back, no.
Tell us a bit about the early days then, when you sort of made the switch over, you were full-time. Did you do any cool trips with those guys back in the day?
Yeah, I mean, it was a very different setup back then. When Tim and Chris Turner set up the magazine in '88, I think it was, they had a little office down in Kent. Tim Manley was up in London. He lived in London. Didn't spend much time in the office, as you probably know from his time here. He had a place in London, and I used to go and see him there, and I used to go down to Kent and see them. And I think in 90 or 91, maybe they sold out to Future Publishing in Bath. And then the next 10 years after that is probably the early days of MBUK. So it changed quite radically from being a tiny little office in Kent to being part of this publishing company, Future Publishing in Bath.
And they were big. Future were huge back then.
And they were growing. They weren't huge then, but they became quite huge. And people like from the Bath days, they got John Stevenson had been with them in Kent, and he came down to Bath. Justin and Jamie were there, and those were the years when you could just we used to turn up and climb through the window. No, there was no signing into the office or anything, and it would be mayhem in the office. Bikes and rubbish everywhere, bikes and kit and all that stuff, and we just ran in and out, ran the place, thought we were the bee's knees, and I guess they let us get away with it because it was popular and it was selling lots of issues. And there were lots of trips. I used to travel a lot with Steve Behr, who was the MBUK tester through all that period, and was an amazing guy, very influential to all of us. I mean, you included, Rob, I know that. And we used to go on a lot of trips, either stuff that we made up ourselves. Let's go here and do this. And
so you had very much had the freedom to kind of do that.
We had the freedom to do all that. I mean, it was very much editorially led, whatever we decided we wanted to do. And Tim was a genius at this.
Yeah.
Tim would let Steve and the tech guy, I mean, Tim's genius was knowing how to appeal to quite a wide audience. Didn't always appeal to the hardcore cyclist as such, but had a knack of coming up with genius ideas that created conversation. Some worked better than others. Some were very, very good, and some were not quite so good. The one that springs to mind is the dancing with your bike in a discotheque, which we recreated in my parents' garage.
Oh my God!
We did quite a lot there, actually. We did the discotheque thing. We got some bloke in with a discotheque that Jamie Tatlow knew, I think.
Right.
Set up the whole thing with lights and flashing lights, and we had Jamie dancing with his bike in the corner.
Like just hopping around, or like just smooching it, or what?
Standing. I can't actually remember. I've got the pictures somewhere. I should dig them out,
And
actually.
it-
But
and
that's
that
the one,
made it
that's the one that for many years got a lot of flack.
Right.
When people used to criticise features in MBUK.
Oh, I suppose that and the panto, and then the scuba diving, and
The pantos, and scuba diving was tricky. I didn't shoot that, but
No.
Underwater, wasn't it?
it was underwater. Yeah.
Helen Mortimer was it?
Helen Mortimer was involved
on
in
the
that, I
cover.
think.
Weights around the wheels.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think they did a couple of those over the years, actually. I don't think it was just the one.
There's a skydiving one as well. Wasn't there?
There was a skydiving one. I obviously didn't do that either. I'm not a skydiver. But we did a lot of bungee jumping and stuff.
Yeah.
Like you do.
Yeah.
But I guess like if you're doing all these weird, wacky things, the mag was selling tens of thousands every month. So like
More than
obviously
More than that, yeah. I mean,
you're doing it right.
Yeah.
So even if it was a bit, we look back and think, oh, that was a bit weird. Bloody worked.
90,000 copies a month.
It totally worked. And Tim's genius was that he was able to get a good team of freelancers together, and he would call each one of us up and talk to us for sometimes hours on end, just talking about all kinds of stuff. And then out of that, ideas would come, and he would pick out the good ones and discard most of the bad ones, not all of them. And then, put us together. And, Brant Richards, who was alter ego Zach Tempest back in the day, came up with a lot of stuff. And I would spend a lot of time up north with, he and Steve Walden lived up near Bradford. And I'd go up twice a month, spend a few days with them each time. And we'd shoot lots of features. Steve would be in charge of the bike testing. We did the bike tests there. And for years it was known as, his house was known as the Northern Wrecking Crew. We go up there, Paul Hinton, Dave Hemming. Dave and I would drive up there probably twice a month and hang out for a bit.
Proper UK, MTB UK royalty.
Probably MBUK, Mountain Biking UK. So we had a northern representation and a southern representation.
Huh.
It was fun, a lot of fun times. We didn't realise what it was becoming, and how big mountain biking would become. We were just enjoying ourselves.
Yeah, and I guess MBUK was always synonymous with the pros. Obviously we've got GMC Jersey back there, and you were part of that as those guys, those personalities started to come through, like Rob Warner, Steve Pete, Jason McCroy, and sort of, I guess you saw them blossoming into the riders that they became.
Yeah, exactly. I met a lot of them before they became, what they ultimately did become, which was mostly world famous and world class riders.
Yeah.
Some of them were just guys we'd had on the magazine, like Dave Hemming was in almost every issue back in the early 90s through the mid 90s. He was a great rider.
Yeah.
And he was keen on being in the mag. And I think there was a time when people thought there was a conspiracy. Why are those guys always in the mag? But they were keen, they were available, they were brilliant riders, and they knew what made good pictures, and they were there.
Yeah. I think if you make yourself available and make yourself out there, then you are going to be in those things all the time.
Absolutely.
You're easy to work with, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And they were easy to work with. They were great collaborators. And Jason was one of those. Jason was further away in Newcastle. I didn't work as much with Jason because his dad, Jim, was a photographer, and they did a bunch of stuff together. But, we worked on Dirt together, a bunch of things, obviously, other than that. But, more famously, the Dirt video that Pete Tompkins put together, which was another stroke of genius. Pete was...
Yeah, right.
Well, Pete's an old school surfer and still surfs these days.
Yeah.
And his idea for Dirt was that there was a bunch of surf movies at the time. Green Iguana was one of them. I can't remember the name of the guy who made them, but they were quite popular, and they had these weird flights of fantasy in the middle of them. Pete's idea was to make a surf movie, but for biking, and I think he executed it brilliantly.
Yeah. And
he paid for it all. He did it all. He put it all together, and in a very short space of time. It was. And I remember Justin and I going up there for a few days while it was all happening, and we got a few pictures and ran a feature. It was great to be part of it. and see all those guys. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, that was, probably towards the end with Jason.
Do you think when you met those guys, you could sort of already tell that they were sort of destined for something special?
I don't know. No, not really. Not
Hard to
really. I
tell.
mean, it is hard to tell.
Yeah.
Because it all kind of evolved naturally.
Yeah.
Especially with Jason going off and doing, the US trips and getting signed by Specialized and all that. It was just kind of an evolution. And I guess when you look back on it from now, it seems kind of quick, but for them it wasn't. It was,
Yeah.
I remember back in those days, having anybody British anywhere near a podium on the downhill side was
a miracle.
a massive
Yeah.
event. If somebody got top 10, it would be newsworthy. You'd read about it in MBUK the next month.
Yeah.
That's how slowly things travelled back then. And with Rob, as the first, Dave Hemming got silver at juniors in the Worlds in 1990, I think.
Yeah,
Durango.
I think so. Yeah.
And that was the first big downhill medal that we had. I mean, obviously we had the cross-country guys, we had Tim Gould and David Baker and those guys doing well internationally, but on the downhill side, it just wasn't happening. It was all the Americans back then, mostly. Tomac, Herbold, those guys. And with people like Rob, I remember seeing him at Alexandra Palace at a bike show. There was an ice race. I don't know, it was way before your time.
No, I remember that.
You remember that?
Yeah, yeah.
And he turned up, and I think he beat Hans Ray in the slalom. I might be wrong. Sorry, Hans, if I am. And we looked at this guy, this sort of caveman-looking guy, and I thought, this guy looks interesting. And then he won the ice race. Nobody had ever seen him before.
Yeah.
Started talking to him. Turns out he lived in Henley, which wasn't a million miles from me.
Yeah.
Thought, okay, let's up. Got together with him, did a shoot with him and Hemming. He spanked Hemming, although Hemming will deny that.
So you were kind of his in?
Yeah, I guess so.
Nice. That's very cool.
So you're to blame for...
Well, I'm to blame for a lot of things, like...
Rob
But
Warner.
Tom, you can't make an omelette without breaking some eggs. So.
Warner's broken a few.
Warner's broken a few, and we made some good omelettes though.
Yeah.
It's been a long, strange trip, but a lot of fun.
How has it been working? Obviously with Warner specifically, he's quite the character. Is it?
Yeah, I mean,
you still work with him now.
I still work with him now. Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
it must be. You must have obviously.
In fact, he's probably my biggest employer now.
Yeah. How is that as sort of following his sort of progression through? Obviously it's a bit of a snapshot into the world of mountain biking with just following him as one person. Has it been good?
Oh, it's been amazing to watch the whole progression, and he's done it so well. I mean, for somebody who appears like such an idiot to the outside world, I mean, he so isn't.
Yeah, he's really intelligent. He's really switched on
smart.
dude. Yeah.
And really on it, and a different person when it's just you and him. I've travelled with him quite a bit.
Yeah.
And depending on if he's playing to a gallery, he'll be one kind of person, and if he's just you and him, he'll more often than not be great company. Not that he's not great company when he's playing to the gallery, because he's very entertaining either way, and he's made a brilliant career for himself.
Yeah. Obviously we had him on the podcast a few months ago, and it was certainly a highlight of of
definitely. It was
Great
really
fun.
good.
Yeah,
It was really good.
you had to use the beeper quite a few times, didn't you?
I think we just gave up after a while.
Yeah, I think Lewis, it's up to 22, 23. Yeah, it's quite a few. It's so far the highest hit rate, without a doubt.
But I think we weren't monetized at that point, so it didn't matter quite so much.
It didn't matter. No. It took him a while to get into the swearing, though. That was a good thing. That was a good thing. So were you just shooting features and bike tests back then, or were you still going out to the races?
I was doing a bit of racing, but I decided fairly early on that racing wasn't going to be my thing. By 95, I'd had children, and I could see the life of a race photographer would be the whole summer away, and I didn't want to do that. I didn't mind going the odd weekend, but you either had to do every weekend or not do it that much.
Yeah.
Also, I think my forte was more organising features rather than go, oh shit, I just missed that guy going past and he won the race, and what do I do now?
Yeah. Okay.
And maybe it's just because I'm a control freak. I don't know. But I preferred the control that you get with features, or the challenge of trying to make something, into a story, and find good places to ride where it might not be obvious that there are.
Yeah.
Find good photographs, wherever I happen to be. It's sort of quite easy when you go out to the Alps and the background is obvious. There'll be a great picture there, but it's not quite so easy when you're in a bit of scrubland on Chobham Common to try and make a good picture.
And I don't know what it was like back then, but when I started getting briefs from Tim, it was normally a phone call, a lot of chat, not a whole lot of detail, and then you were kind of left to it, and then you had to just deliver something. And it could be, I think the first feature I wrote was me and a couple of other guys out in the Alps against skiers.
Oh, yes.
And
I didn't do that one.
No real detail, just kind of go and ride down some snowy mountains. It was, the story kind of comes about after you've done it, but it isn't like now. Obviously, we brief with a lot of detail. We make sure we know the outcome.
It was nothing like that back then. I mean, honestly, Tim would call usually between 6 and 7 in the evening, just as you're starting to have supper or something. And then Jill would know not to bother with with supper for me for an hour at least. Yeah. And it was great because you'd talk about all sorts of things, but in amongst that there'd be these conversations about feature ideas and what to do on a feature, and he was great at coming up with the idea, but he pretty much left all the execution to me. It would be, I'd be sort of the producer of it, I suppose. And I enjoyed that. Yeah. Whereas when you go to a race, you're not producing anything. You're finding the best angles to capture.
You're sort of at the mercy of the organisers.
You're at the mercy of the organisers, and it's up to you to capture the right things at the right time. And those guys have a huge skill. Yeah. Which I don't think is my strong point.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, I can do it. I just don't do it often enough to be brilliant.
Okay, to kind of have your eye in.
Yeah. You have to know. You have to have an in with all the race teams and know when the races are coming and know what they're wearing that year. If I turn up to Fort William and haven't seen any racing since the previous year, it's like, oh, who was that?
He makes out like I've been to Fort William with Steve, and he still gets a load of bangers.
Yeah.
Well, nice of you to say. Robert.
Yeah, it's true. Tim once asked me to do, I think it was you and I, he wanted us to do rate the services around the UK.
Nice.
Because I was travelling so much. He wanted to do a feature on that. Not the destinations where I'm going to ride the bike, just the services.
They were mostly terrible.
Yeah, mostly terrible.
Pre-Gloucester services, pre-T-Bay, I'm guessing.
T-Bay
was an early one. Was it?
Yeah,
T-Bay was the clear winner for a long time.
It still probably is.
Yeah.
I think it was through that conversation with Tim where I was moaning about having to sleep in car parks at services, where I'd obviously put T-Bay on a pedestal, said it was so good, and then everything else was awful.
Yeah, but the T-Bay car park, isn't it? It's not big enough.
It's fine. It's sleep in a van.
I know, but
you get kicked out now, though, or you get fined.
Oh, do you?
Yeah.
We're not into that so much.
That's why that feature's never going to happen.
But the one he did ask me to work with you was that Nevis one. Do you remember?
Oh my God, yeah. Oh, that was harrowing.
This is the one where we took a jump bike up Nevis or something.
Yeah. I was there. We were there for the race. We were there for Fort William World Cup, and I think Tim called me, and I was in the pits, and he said, "What are you doing on Friday?" And that's when the racing was like, you're there for a whole week. It wasn't just a few days. You're there for a whole week, and there was nothing happening on Friday. So I was like, "Oh yeah, I'll go up." I was just working on Luke's bike. I was mechanicking for Luke basically that week, and I think I called you, and you said, "Oh, don't worry, you don't need to go to the top. It's fine. We'll just fake it." So borrowed Neil Donohue's jump bike, met up with the lad that's idea it was, who had it was a downhill bike versus what was a kind of a trail bike against a hardtail.
Except they weren't proper trail bikes back then.
They weren't proper trail bikes back then. And I was on a jump bike. I had 2 brakes. That was the only saving grace. Slick tyres.
And it was easier to carry over the bits that you had
to totally. And there was a lot of carrying.
But I actually remember that the guy who wrote the feature couldn't carry his downhill bike, and you had to carry it.
I had to keep taking mine up and going back down to get his. And then because Steve had told me we were only going to go halfway up, I just had like riding kit, a coat and a sandwich in my pocket. So
It gets pretty chilly up
It's
there.
only Britain's tallest mountain.
then the news got broke that, oh, yeah, we actually need a photo on the top. Steve isn't coming on the way up. This other lad's got a camera. I had to carry that as well. It wasn't a good day. And then he'd written the feature, hadn't he?
I think
He had
yeah,
like
I
a
can't
predetermined outcome,
Right, okay.
and it wasn't the jump bike. It wasn't the jump bike coming down first. But I came down and I was like, I'm done. Rode down. I think I sat with you for about half an hour, waiting for everyone else to come down.
Yeah,
It was funny time,
funny times.
funny old times. But yeah, long day out.
You've worked with also like many people. Do any sort of? I'm guessing Rob stands out as a great guy. Are there any who stood out? Not you, Rob.
No.
Well,
Rob Warner. Rob Weaver's
Rob
obviously
Weaver,
great to
Rob
work
Weaver
with.
too. Yeah,
No,
absolutely.
lessons,
Well, we've worked together for 25 years.
Yeah, long time.
Saracen catalogue.
Yeah, Saracen catalogue back in the day.
day.
Yeah. There's not often you can shoot an entire catalogue in a car, like on the bit of the verge, like grass verge next to a car park.
Wasn't quite that.
Wasn't far off. We can make that work. Don't worry.
I mean, that was with Paul Hinton. He was one I worked a lot with in the early years, and he was great to work with.
He was a former pro.
He was a former
yeah, he was
pro
a phenomenal
cross-country
rider.
racer.
Yeah,
Did a bit of downhill too, I think, at one
yeah, a
point.
little bit.
Raced for rally. He had his own team after that.
Yeah.
And, he was good to work with. Hemming was great to work with.
Have there any stood out that were maybe difficult to work with? Who's sort of challenging? Or how would you manage that if you don't want to name names?
Well, I'm not going to name names. There obviously are people. It depends how you define difficult. I mean,
Sure.
there are obviously people whose focus isn't necessarily getting the best picture for an MBUK article.
Right.
With the best will in the world, cross-country racer has far more important things to concentrate on than helping me get a great picture for a feature in MBUK. Their sponsor has told them, you've got to go and do this. It's going to take an hour, but obviously it's not going to take an hour. I'm telling them, we need you all day or all morning or whatever, They want to get back and eat their lettuce leaf and whatever it was back then. and do their, gym and whatever. And weren't interested in, going over to that peak over there to get that shot that would be way nicer than the one in their driveway.
And doing it again.
And doing it again.
And
Doing it a few
Which
times.
is
'Cause
just
back
the
then-
nature of it, right?
Back then also we were shooting film and it wasn't so easy to just look on we got the shot,
Yeah.
we can move on.
That was going to be my next question. Obviously, you've worked across everything from film through to the digital age now. Like that transition must have been a whole new way of working, a lot of new things to learn. Like, but you've obviously managed it. Like, was it an easy process?
It was, yeah. I mean, it was a slow process because shot slide film, which is challenging to use, even in the sense of film, because I don't know how technical to go on this, but
Go nuts.
color negative film's got a bigger latitude than slide film, color reversal film. So you had to get your exposure spot on with slide, whereas you had a bit more leeway with print, and of course with the magazines it was all slide film. So that was a skill to learn, and being able to execute that reasonably consistently meant that I got consistent work. And you get a reputation, you can rely on that guy to do this because the exposures are fine, you're not going to cock it up. So there was a high bar to entry, and also film was expensive, processing was expensive. With digital, once the price of the cameras came down, it changed the whole entry-level thing.
Yeah.
Because once you bought the camera, you could just shoot as much as you liked. And you could see straight away, that's wrong, I'll try it a different way. Whereas with film and process, with the old slide film, you had to wait to get it back from the processors and then go and try it again the next time. And it was a much harder process. But the switch over was gradual, because when digital first came out, none of us really trusted the digital image to be as good as the slide image.
Okay.
It possibly was, possibly wasn't. But I personally bought a camera and then ran it alongside slide film.
I remember
for at
shooting.
least a couple of years, where I was.
We shot bike tests with you. You do some on
exactly
on film and some digital.
So because I think there's original. It was back in 2002. I think I bought my first 2002-03. I bought an EOS, whatever the heck it was called then, And it definitely wasn't as good as the slide film, but it was close. And as the new ones came out, they got better and better until they obviously got better than the slide film. So by 2004, I made the jump completely. So it was that gradual 2-year period of getting used to it and getting used to the workflow and everything. And so when I actually did jump, it wasn't such a big move. And I guess also back then, storage was expensive. File sizes were smaller, but storage is way more expensive. So, and even the cards were expensive back then. Yeah. So there was an initial expense. The cameras were hugely expensive compared to analog cameras. Yeah. So there was a big outlay. Also, the other thing that was relevant was that when we did shoots for MBUK or whoever, we would charge out the film and the processing to the magazine. It would appear as a separate item. You'd charge a day shoot rate, and then you'd charge separate film and processing. Of course, when digital comes along, they expect you to be sitting there processing it all for nothing. So and to this day, I still sometimes do it as a digital processing fee on top of the shoot fee. Because instead of going and having a cup of coffee while you're waiting for the film to be processed, you're sitting there doing it all yourself.
Yeah, on Photoshop or whatever.
Yeah.
So did it make it a more difficult proposition then once digital came? You said the barrier to entry was lower. Did it become more competitive, harder to sort of get work through that, or you sort of built your name enough that? I
think for me personally, I'd built my name enough so it didn't really matter certainly in the early days. As time went on, I think what happened was, it became more competitive, but also I think, there was a certain sector back in the old days, the magazine couldn't take any pictures on their own. I would do everything, or the photographers would do everything. So if you needed a picture of, any component or anything, it would be sent to a photographer to do. And so the volume of work was much bigger.
Yeah.
Then with digital, every client had a digital camera and could take stuff that wasn't, critical to be blown up over a double-page spread or a big action shot. So the nature of the work changed inevitably.
You even had you had a MBUK business card, didn't you? You were that involved. Yes. Yeah, that's I think I've still got it. Yeah. It was a proper. Yeah, when I met Steve, it was a proper hero moment for me.
I bet.
Yeah, totally.
I think I remember the first time I was shot by you. It was probably a year or two into me starting, because I ended up on road bikes a lot to start with. But going on a shoot with Steve Behr was quite a thing, because I read the mag since 2001. Yeah. So I sort of, I missed that early period, but the mid period of
the noughties,
with all the Doddy and all that stuff, you were in it consistently.
Yeah, I mean that mid period was great too. I mean there was a lot of crazy stuff going on back then. With Doddy and Jimmer coming in then too, and those guys were great to work with, and still fun to hang
absolute
out
legends.
with. Yeah, absolute legends.
Probably less hijinks these days.
Less hijinks these days, I can imagine.
There was a lot of chili sauce and things being injected into donuts, and there was a lot of
But I mean, even in that mid period, so the early years and the mid years, there was a lot of traveling. I did a lot of traveling. I don't do any now, really, and for various reasons for that. But we did a lot of trips. Steve Wallen used to organise in the early years. Oh, let's go to Chamonix. We'll take a bunch of bikes to test, and we drove over and spend a week there and do N features and have a great time and come back with a lot of good stuff. And then, so that, I think those kind of trips then prompted Tim to come up with the idea of every winter we go and do a trip in November somewhere. That was usually the team launch one, I think. So we had Team MBUK consistently back then. And we'd go to often the Canary Islands or Spain somewhere, and somewhere sunny in the winter. We'd go in November and February. In February we'd take usually Steve Pete, Rob Warner, Martin Ashton, Martin Hawes, and then a rotating cast of reprobates. Really depends on who we, Tim and I would sometimes go through, and Tim would go, what about so-and-so? I think that might be more trouble than it's worth. But as I said before, you can't make an omelette without breaking eggs, and you needed those guys and that behaviour. That's the same thing that made them do all that stuff. It was the thing that made them great riders and great to work with. and gave us great features. You know,
But you would have had a really young G. Atherton on some of those trips,
Really
right?
young G.
Because you've got quite a cool story,
Oh
I
God,
think.
G was. I mean, I remember meeting G and Dan at the airport on their first trip and being quite shocked as to how young they were, and you know, they came with us to Spain, and I think Dan was meant to chaperone G, but Dan was only about 15 or 16. You know, it was crazy, and G was crazy back then. I mean, he would literally throw himself off stuff. I mean, there was this one sand dune thing we were working on in Spain, and the other guys were sort of riding down it and sliding and carving turns, and he decided, no, I'm going to huck off this thing. Way over jumped it, of course, as G does, and landed at the bottom on his head. I thought, oh God, here we go. You know.
And I guess you're like the responsible adult,
And
right?
I was the responsible adult, yeah.
So it falls to you to
Falls to me to
pick up
the
the
pieces.
yeah.
I have to say though, Will, as team manager on any trip that Will was on,
Yeah.
I could devolve that responsibility to him, because he was brilliant at that,
Yeah.
and he's still brilliant at that to this day. You know, he was a great organizer, and I remember one time in Spain, I always used to say to the guys, look, you can do what you like as long as you turn up in the morning for the shoot. I don't care. Just don't wake me if you get arrested. And so there's two stories to go with that. One involves Ashton and Hawes. We went to pick them up. They were staying somewhere slightly away from us. And we went to pick them up for the shoot in the morning, and we saw them coming in from the night before. You know, slightly the worse for wear. And to be fair to them, they just got changed into their riding kit and came out.
Fair play.
And did the shoot, and they were fine-ish. I mean, you know, but
because they didn't need much balancing skills, did they? Really?
Yeah, right.
No. But you know, they did it. They got on with it.
Yeah.
And the other one was when we were on a trip. Again, this was a bit later. This was in the 2000s, I think, in the noughties. And Will was in charge. And there was an incident involving scooters and police, and we were flying out the next morning, and I heard a kerfuffle in the middle of the night. We were getting up early to go to the airport the next morning, and I could hear something going on. I thought, no, I'm not getting up. And what had happened was that the police had come around, having arrested, I think it was Mark Beaumont and somebody else, and come back to the room to get their passports and take them off. And to be fair, they didn't wake me. You know, they woke Will, and Will sorted it out, and Will went with them and bailed them out and whatever. Sort of. So thanks, Will.
He's a good dude.
Thanks.
He's a good dude.
You said that you know, on G's first trip with you, he sort of overshot his jumps. Have you had to deal with any sort of big horrible injuries at all, like on shoots? Because you're shooting people who are, you know, at the limits of the sport in many respects.
Yeah, no, I've been lucky, and they've been lucky, I guess, mostly. G tended to be the one that hurt himself the worst. There was another Spanish trip. G decided to backflip a road gap that he promised me he was just going to jump off, and then flung himself off. And the first time, to be fair, he almost made it. And
The first time.
And he sort of half landed it and kind of almost rode it out, and then he was going to do another one, and of course the second time he landed on his head, which wasn't so clever. And again, Will sorted him out.
Good old Will.
Good old Will.
What about you though? I've seen someone ride into you while you're holding a camera.
Who was that? Because we talked about this, and I don't remember.
It was when we were shooting jump bikes down in Penshurst.
Oh yes, that was
Was it
Carl
Helmsley? Yeah. I just remember looking over. I looked over. I think the land of the jump, because I'd heard a noise, and I saw Carl going, and then Steve came around with just blood down his face.
I'd forgotten about.
Oh.
I sort of remember that run, but I don't remember being that badly injured.
I think you're more pissed off about your camera.
Yeah, it's always that fisheye lens is the problem, because you have to get really close.
Yeah.
And I remember now that you mentioned, I remember telling him, "Watch out! I'm standing here with a 15mm," and he clipped it, and it did. Yeah, it hit me in the
Cut your
forehead.
head.
And the
Yeah,
other
yeah.
time was also with the 15mm. I was lying down, and Dave was meant to jump over me, and I maybe sat up a little bit too quick, and he maybe dropped it a little short, and his back wheel rode across the lens, left a tire mark, and again pushed. It just pushes it into your forehead, and it's fine. I mean, luckily I've gotten off lightly really with that stuff. Nearly got killed by a motorcycle once
Did you?
at a race. I don't know why there was a motorcycle riding off this drop, but suddenly there was a motorcycle riding off this drop, and I was sort of in its way, and I managed to dive out of the way, and I don't think I'd have been here today if I hadn't. That was the closest call I can remember.
You've been shooting for the mag for, say, like 37, 38 years. You must probably have more covers than any other photographer, I'd have thought. Are there any that stand out in particular? And we speak to quite a few riders, and a lot of them say, when you get a cover, it's still a big thing. And, obviously when I've had the one cover of my life, it was a big thing. I know Rob gets a few. Is getting a cover on MBUK like the pinnacle? Is it still a good thing to get? And do you still get stoked by it?
I get stoked when I get a cover shot. I still get stoked by it. It's nice. It's great to see. It's a billboard of your work, I guess.
Yeah.
Are there any that stick out? It's hard to say. I don't know. I mean, I honestly don't know how many covers I've had, and it's not because I'm being modest about it. I just really don't know. I've never really counted it. But I got asked the other day for a shot that was on I think it might have been my first MBUK cover, and it was Dave Hemming in Mallorca on an Allsop bike.
Ah.
And I sort of grabbed the shot almost by accident. And he came too close to me, I think, and I cropped the front wheel. But it worked. He was his body was in a great position. And somebody asked me for that picture the other day, and they're going to run it in a Scottish magazine thing, printed magazine that's coming out.
Right.
Shredder, I think it's called.
Shredder, yeah. Cool. That's cool.
So yeah, it's and I think coincidentally that was my first MBUK cover. So you remember that kind of thing.
Sure.
I've had covers with Rob. The Rob cover that he'll hate the most and that I remember the most is the Chitty Chitty Bang Bang one.
This is not one I know. Before my time.
It's do you remember the film Chitty Chitty Bang
Yeah.
Bang? Yeah. So
he's all dressed up, isn't he?
Yeah, he's all dressed up. So Rob's family home is in the film. The wall that appears in the film were the two kids. I don't know how much. I don't want to go into too much detail, but there's two kids standing next to a wall, and that's the wall to Rob's parents' house. And then this car comes along and tries to avoid them and drives into the pond, and that's a pond next to Rob's parents' house. So there's a connection with Rob to Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, and a lot of it was filmed in his area where he lives. And so Tim had this idea to recreate scenes from Chitty Chitty Bang Bang and have Rob ride around some of those locations. And so he did a wall ride off that wall. And for some reason, we did a cover shot with him jumping off a ramp. I don't know where this ties into the film, but with a rocket on his back. And Jill, I remember, made the rocket out of cardboard or something, and this was quite labor intensive. We did all this stuff. We used my dad's World War II flying helmet, with
the goggles,
things, and goggles, and he dressed up in all of that stuff, and
he's got it on the wall.
Yeah,
he says he's got it on the wall.
Cape on or something. I can't remember all the details, but anyway, we shot this cover, and that's one that obviously stands out for that reason. I mean, Petey too. Petey's great for pictures.
He's a real workhorse, isn't he?
He is a workhorse, and the thing that stands out working with a lot of those guys, and Hans is another one. If they're interested in the end product, if they're interested in how they look in the picture, and then they want to collaborate with you to make a good picture, that makes life so much easier. It's the ones that aren't or don't have that visual literacy or whatever that don't really care what it looks like. They're not as invested in the process, and that makes it harder.
Do you have to be a great rider to look good in a photo, do you think? Or
no, I mean it helps. Yeah, it definitely helps. But I mean, you know, there've been people who've worked on the magazine who aren't the greatest riders in the world, but they're aware of how they look on a bike, and they know what to do when we come to do pictures to make themselves look good for a photograph. Because photographs, as I said before, I don't know if it's different to a video, where I can just take a slice of time and for that brief moment, you know, you can look great. Whereas for the rest, you know, if you take a bigger slice, it looks not so great.
Yeah.
You could be cartwheeling out a shot, couldn't you?
Yeah, exactly.
But it looks like you did in Superman.
Yeah.
Or you can just literally do a little flick for an instant and it looks great, but then, you know, you're just straight in and straight out.
Yeah.
So, and the people who are aware of that, even if they're not the greatest riders, can look great in pictures. And sometimes the greatest riders don't always look that great in pictures because they're not necessarily, you know, doing the showmanship on the bike. They're just hyper efficient at going fast. I remember doing a shoot with Nico and Will once, and Will's got this incredible style, and you know, Will can look good.
He moves
from
a
the beginning
lot,
to the end of the
doesn't he?
track. Yeah, you know, so everywhere. But with Nico, you have to watch for those moments where it just looks perfect. You know.
Yeah, despite going faster.
Despite going way faster.
Yeah, not moving.
He's hardly moving.
Yeah.
Huh.
We should probably talk about the Hall of Fame. You are our absolutely. You're our first Hall of Famer ever to be on here. What's the process like? Because I remember you get nominated and then you're voted for. So it was you and Tim, wasn't it?
Yeah, it
You
was Tim and I. It was a joint
yeah.
nomination, which is not the usual way
No.
that things happen. But I think that was all sort of brought about by Hans Ray, who, as I think I alluded to there, is a great person to work with. And I've worked with him for a long time. And he's very invested in the whole process of making pictures. And he's also very invested in the whole history of mountain biking. I mean, he's been riding with the Laguna Rads since he first went to California in the early 90s. Maybe even the late 80s, I can't remember. But they meet every Wednesday night, almost without fail. And the group size can vary between not very many and a whole heap. And they meet every Wednesday night at the fire pit. They go for a ride and they come back, and it's somebody's responsibility to make food, to bring food for the night, and then they sit around the fire and tell stories. And it's a great institution.
Have you been on the ride?
I've been on the ride, but more like I walked and took pictures.
Okay.
Because their rides are hike and bike, and it's
pretty fun.
They tend to hike up and then straight down. So when you're carrying cameras, it's not always that easy to do the rides. And have you ever ridden Laguna?
No.
Yeah,
No.
It's a particular terrain, and it's interesting.
Okay.
But their Wednesday night fire pits are great.
Yeah.
Definitely a part of mountain biking history,
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry, I digressed.
That's okay. That was my fault.
They're in the Hall of the Laguna Rads as an institution. They're in the Hall of Fame. Yeah.
Huh.
So yeah, Hans and I worked together for a long time, and I guess Hans's connection with MBUK was mostly through me going out to California or him coming here and then doing features, and he obviously knew Tim as well. Tim mostly used to stay at home and make phone calls and then send us out to execute the stuff. It was me and Steve Walland and Brandt were the face of the magazine back then, in the 90s. So, and also I think from Hans's point of view, MBUK was a great venue for trials riding. None of the other magazines would really feature it at all. And Tim loved trials. It was an easy thing to go and do, not to ride, but to produce a feature on.
He did the hop factor, didn't he? Do you remember the hop factor? So like
we had many competitions based around trials.
Yeah, I remember that well.
So it was a big thing in MBUK, and all the trials riders worldwide would fall over, and they desperately want to be in MBUK because it was one of the few places with a decent circulation that they could be seen and be respected, which they deserve to be.
There was hip hop, wasn't there, in the back of the mag? I really like.
And we had Martin and Martin, the two Martins as they were called.
Yeah.
For a period, they were in almost every month, and trials was a big thing, and I think MBUK was very influential in that regard. And I think Hans's idea was that through our enthusiasm, Tim and myself, I was particularly enthusiastic about it. It was great to shoot, lovely to work with all those guys. And we pushed it a lot. And I think, it was in recognition of all of that he wanted us
forward.
to be in the Hall of Fame, I guess. I mean, I don't know. I'm not sure that I see it quite the same, but
then you were voted in.
we got inducted in 21, I think, 22.
Yeah.
But the actual ceremony was postponed for the COVID years.
Yeah.
So they did 3 in 1, and it was a lovely event because it was 3 years of inductions all happening at the same time. So it was a bigger than normal thing. And you go out there, and Tim and I went. Unfortunately, Jill couldn't come, and Jill's been very instrumental. My wife Jill's been very instrumental in the whole thing. She ran the picture library, which I set up eventually with the ski photographer. She ended up running that as a mountain bike picture library. Still does now.
Well, whenever we call your house, it would be Jill that
It would be
answers.
Jill that
and
answers
Jill
the
that
phone,
dealt
yeah,
with all the
exactly.
problems.
Unfortunately, she couldn't come to as instrumental as she was in the early days. She couldn't come because she'd had a pulmonary embolism and wasn't allowed to do long haul flights.
Right.
So I took my 2 sons instead, Sam and Josh, and it was great to have them. I'm sorry that Jill missed out, but it was great to have Sam and Josh there. And of course, Tim came as well, and we had a great weekend in Marin, riding with all the old timers and the old legends, and Joe Breeze and Charlie Kelly and Jackie Filan, and it was Gary Fisher turned up, and it was just a fun weekend.
That's so cool. Yeah, really, really cool.
And then they did a little presentation, and we got our little award things, and had a lovely time.
It's pretty special though to be kind of held in that sort of esteem with those people like that.
Yeah,
the real founders of mountain
it was great,
biking.
and a lot of the inductees from previous years come to the event. Like Stick and Lee were there.
Oh,
and,
cool!
it was just nice to ride with those guys and to have a nice weekend with them.
Yeah,
and I would go again. It's a shame it's quite so far as it is, but yeah, I will.
It's not a train ride, is it?
No.
I guess one thing I wanted to ask was, you've been doing it for a long time now.
Yeah.
You've kind of seen, the digital stuff come in, a lot more photographers now. How have you kind of kept that creativity and that sort of, I guess, your edge in a sense about you? What have you done to kind
do I
of
still have an edge? I don't
Yeah,
know.
absolutely. But do you feel like you've had to change how you shoot stuff? If you tweak your style in accordance with things?
Yes, there are fashions in photography.
Okay.
In all photography there are fashions. I think when I first started doing it, I was quite heavily influenced by a lot of the old surf photographers. And because my first love is surfing. I grew up in South Africa, in case you couldn't tell from my wonderful accent. And I still surf very occasionally now, but I'm much more a cyclist now than I am a surfer.
Does it pain you to say that?
It does a little bit, actually.
I thought so, I could tell.
But, if you're not paddling out every day, it's really hard to paddle out.
Yeah.
That once or twice a year when you get to do it. Whereas if you're riding every day, it's easy to ride every day.
Yeah.
You got to keep doing the things. And I don't live anywhere near the sea, so it's hard to go surfing that regularly. But anyway, sorry, I digress. And I was very influenced by the surfing photographers of the 70s, like Jeff Devine and Aaron Chang and those guys. And a lot of their stuff was quite bright.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the a lot of the skateboarding stuff with the flash, even though it was on camera back then, it was just like that, bang, a bright splash of light against the blue sky, And I think I tried to sort of recreate that a bit.
Yeah.
A lot of the early stuff was quite heavily flash lit, and a lot of it was direct on camera flash. And then, of course, as time goes on, you think, well, maybe it needs a bit of separation. You put a flash off the camera, then you have 2 flashes off the camera, then you have 3 flashes off the camera. Then, of course, digital comes along and the sensors get a lot better, and then you don't need a flash anymore for some things.
Yeah.
Although there are still occasions when you do, but it's obviously much more of a faff and much harder to do. But so the passions come and go, So there are times when everyone's shooting flash, then no one's shooting flash. And so you adapt your style according to what you feel like doing, or what the clients want, or what what the magazine needs, and what the circumstances dictate. So somebody comes along and does something that looks different and cool. That's kind of interesting.
And you don't find it too hard to sort of do that almost?
Sometimes you're
quite tricky.
In some areas you get a bit set in your ways, and it's your reflexes take over and you do the thing that you do.
Got you. Okay.
But another time, if there's no pressure, you can try different things. It doesn't always work.
I remember when you were shooting on film, and the criteria for the bike tests a long time ago, it was crazy, wasn't it? Because it was probably over 14 pages, maybe more.
It was big.
You'd have to have X amount of drive side shots, X amount of non-drive side shots.
Yes.
Yeah, another
So
shot
many
showing
group
this
shots.
bit.
Yeah.
That's, and then you just and you can't check on the back of the camera.
Yeah.
I don't think I fully appreciated it back then. Just
it's
what
also
a hard
to keep track
job.
of what you're doing when you need that many shots.
I remember we did start to write stuff
we
down, but it was really complicated.
It was complicated.
Fair
But
play.
I mean, it didn't seem so at the time, because that's how it was,
Yeah, true.
I think if I went back to it now, I'd find it complicated.
Yeah, a bit of a headache maybe.
And to be honest, looking at well-exposed slides on a light box, there's nothing better.
Really,
It is amazing. I still love it.
Yeah.
And I can lose myself for a day looking at all the slides. And when I get asked for a picture and I find this, I start looking through all the stuff that not related to that, just because it's nice.
Because it's nice. Yeah.
And it's memories.
It must be nice to have all of that stuff.
It is nice. Well,
Some
if you
of it.
asked Jill, she'd say no. But and winter projects tend to be getting rid of a lot of the old stuff, because I didn't really edit it that tightly back then.
Okay.
So I've got way too much stuff, and I've got to sit there and go through it all and scan some of it. I don't scan. I only scan on demand if I haven't already got it.
Okay.
But it's hugely time consuming.
But kind of nice.
It's nice to do. It's nice to spend a day doing that.
Yeah.
Or a few days doing that. But I was saying there's nothing better than looking at a slide on a light box. But I don't want to make any more slides. Honestly, I don't want to go back there.
Yeah.
Did you ever get pulled in the sort of direction of video at all? Obviously, in more recent times, video's a big thing for a lot of brands. Have you ever dabbled?
We definitely shot some stuff.
Yeah, I would say I've dabbled. I mean, I've never. I think with video, you need to be into the process of editing, and in order to be into the process of editing, you've got to spend a lot of time doing it. And I think for me, that ship has probably sailed. If I was younger, I would probably do it. What I find is when I quite enjoy the process of shooting the footage sometimes, but the editing daunts me, because I don't spend enough time doing it, and therefore I have to learn. Every time I do it, I have to learn from scratch again almost, and it's frustrating. And I think initially when I was ever tempted in the 90s, the stuff they used was, the cameras were like this big, and the tripods were that big, and it was just so much gear, and the sound was complicated, and I thought about it and looked at it and nah, I'm not doing that.
Maybe glad you didn't in the end.
I'm glad I didn't in the end, and also nowadays, as I get older, I'm trying to reduce the weight of stuff I carry.
Sure.
And not increase it. And you need gimbals and whatever. Max
can tell us all the stuff.
I'm just looking at the size of that camera on the tripod there and thinking, that's quite a bit bigger than what I brought with me today. That's
Yeah, right. Flipping it, it's a bit different, isn't it? I know you don't want to admit it, but like you said, you're more of a rider now, more of a cyclist.
Yeah.
Before we wrap up, let's talk about riding a bit, because you're getting out quite a bit now. Is that right?
I am, yeah. I mean, I'm working less and riding a lot more, which is great, because in the early days, I think I would, as I said to you, I'd go up to stay with Steve and Grant, and in the very early days, we'd ride out on the bike test, and I'd carry my camera bag, and I'm riding with Dave Hemming and Paul Hinton and Steve Wall, and they were all serious athletes. And I had this big camera bag on my back, and first of all, I wasn't able to keep up with them without the camera bag, but with the camera bag, it became a problem, And so as time went on, I'd then, as I got more gear and the bag got bigger and heavier, I'd drive over there and meet them, and then walk around and shoot the stuff, and then let them go and do a long ride so that they could enjoy the ride.
Yeah.
And as time went on, I suppose I did more of that than actual riding. So the busier I was with photography, the less actual riding I got to do. And of course, as you know, when you have children, it's harder to make as much time to go riding. And so for a long time, when I was flat out working. I was riding a bit, but mostly working. And now I'm working less and really enjoying the riding. And now I feel it's like my time to get that riding time in, as opposed to just walking somewhere. And also now with the advent of e-bikes, it's much easier to carry my bag and actually do a proper ride with you guys. Like last time, a couple of times I've been out with you, I've been able to go out and do the ride. And sometimes I'm technically challenged with all that stuff.
That's not true.
But it's nice to have the excuse of having my camera on my back. So I'm not going to ride down there with my camera.
That's why I always give Max a go. At the end of the day, I'll take his camera back. Oh yeah, you guys go. It's fine.
So what bikes are you riding at the moment?
So I'm lucky enough to have a couple of Marin bikes that I ride, which are great. They've been brilliant. They've looked after me really nicely. I've got an analog Rift Zone and a digital Rift Zone,
wicked.
An e-bike. So depending on, if I'm out on a shoot, I'll always take the e-bike. Yeah. But, like this weekend, for example, on Saturday, I've got a common near me, and I went on the analog bike and just spent a couple of hours pottering about the common and doing a lot of the old school trails that probably we used to shoot in the day, just riding around and having a good time. And then yesterday Sunday I went out on the e-bike to Swinley, because I can ride to there. It's about 5 or 6 miles, either cross country or on a cycle path. Yeah. And I can get there and then have a lot of fun blasting around. The thing about Swinley is it's a lot of steep ups and downs. They're very short. Yeah. But it's a pain. If I go on the analog bike, I'll probably just ride the one downhill and then go and do something else. Whereas if I'm on the e-bike, I'll do the 5 downhills on the one hill,
Yeah.
So it's great to have that choice.
And a bit of gravel as well.
And quite a lot of gravel.
With Warner.
Yeah. Doing a lot of gravel. I've had a Kinesis Tripster for many years, the version 1. Yeah. Nice titanium bike. It was a bike that was in Steve Warland's armory when he unfortunately passed away. So it's great to have that connection to Steve with that bike,
That's really cool.
And over the years, I originally had 2 sets of wheels for it and would do a Sunday road ride with a bunch and then do gravel rides during the week. But then I just felt I just can't be doing road rides anymore. I just don't deal with the traffic, and our roads are so uncomfortable that I might as well just ride a gravel bike on the road if I'm on the road. Yeah. I can't be doing head down, chasing people with skinny tires and bouncing all the way down. That's not for me. But around our way, there are millions of bridleways. I've got gravel routes in every direction from home, so I'm never bored with it.
Yeah, we rode to the King's House, didn't we?
Yeah, we did. We did.
Hot round to the King's House.
Oh, nice.
Gravel ride with Steve.
We did. And
no, his actual house. Right. Yeah. Windsor Castle.
Windsor Castle.
The castle, yeah. Not Buckingham Palace, no.
Yeah, Windsor Castle.
Pop round, he wasn't in.
No.
So and I've got lots of gravel routes going off now, and it's just there's something nice about being able to hop on a bike and ride from home and explore and do off-road rides and so literally in a circle around the house. I've got 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 mile rides, loops that I can do, and so I don't often get bored with it.
That's cool.
And then I've got Swinley on my doorstep and Chobham Common where we shot many things, and there's a few other mountain bike destinations. So it's great. It's where people say, don't you want to go and live in somewhere further away that's got more countryside? I've got a lot on my doorstep. It's amazing. You talk to the Surrey guys. Talk to Ollie, and there's, and he's another great one to work with. Ollie. Yeah.
Ollie Wilkins.
Wilkins. Yeah. And those guys are not that far from me, so it's fun to catch up with them. You talk to him, and just so much stuff.
It's cool how
more
it's
stuff
evolved,
than you'd
isn't it?
imagine
Yeah.
in the southeast.
Yeah, I
Or
think
in
that-
our part of the southeast, anyway.
well, the first time, I mean, I remember coming up to shoot bike tests at yours, just thinking, where are we going to go?
Where are we going to go?
So close to London, like what on earth?
Yeah.
But we did it. Month
And that
after
doesn't
month.
even count the Surrey Hills. I mean, Surrey Hills is about 50-minute, like Peaceake's about a 50-minute drive for me. So I don't often do that. I should do it more, really. I just like to get on the bike at home
Yeah.
and ride out. But I mean, there's a lot of stuff there.
Yeah,
There's a lot of good riding there.
very cool.
So, yeah, plenty of riding.
Good. All right. Well, we'll wrap it up there, I think.
Yeah.
Steve, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks so much for coming to Bristol.
Well,
really
thank you,
appreciate it.
thank you both for having me. It's
Oh, you're
much
welcome.
appreciated. It's always nice to come back to MBUK. And as I've said in the past, if you cut me in half, it'd probably bleed MBUK. You know?
No, yeah, we really appreciate that, and obviously all the photos as well. They're absolutely
Yeah.
good. It's always a pleasure to work with you.
It's been a lot of fun.
You're
Thank
a
you,
legend.
guys.
Thank you, Steve.
All right. Well, thanks for listening to the MBUK podcast. We'll of course be back with another episode soon, so keep your eyes and ears peeled for that. And thanks again, Steve. Thanks, Rob. And thank you all of you as well.
Cheers.